Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode. And Chris and I were talking, and we think it's a good idea to maybe reintroduce ourselves because it's been a while. We've gotten a few new followers, and we just want to make sure people know who we are. So, myself, I'm currently a product coach, advisor, and consultant moving out on my own. This is a recent move, actually, so it's an update on my end. And basically, I'm helping, as a strategic partner to both product and design leaders in helping them develop the best organization or the best, team they can possibly build together. And I'll pass on to Chris.
Hey everyone, thanks Hugo. So my name is Chris. I'm the founder of a consultancy that builds great product operating models, so helpfully helping organizations to continue to build great products. I have nearly 20 years in technology and product, and I tend to partner with leaders to scale high-performing outcome-driven product organizations. I've also been speaking now I worked it out, it's 12 years I've been doing public speaking now. I've just come off the back of my speaking circuit this year where I was speaking in Berlin, London, Lisbon, and Vilnius, my first time in Lithuania. And I'm also in the process of writing a book called Make the Product Shift with co-authors Ezra Etish and my host today as well, my co-host Hugo. So yeah, that's what my focus is at the moment. I'm also doing a lot of leadership development coaching coming to the end of this year to prepare people for what 2026 has to offer.
Wow, Chris. Yeah, can I just say you've got a much better intro than I do, but introduction. But I'll do it next time. I'll work on it. I'll work on that. So
That's what you
moving
get.
on.
That's what you get for 2.5 years of running your own business and 2.5 years of trying to understand what the hell your introduction should be. And when I was reading it out, I was like, I should change this. So you've got some time left to iterate on that.
Cool, cool. So moving on, right? So the topic we wanted to look at today, we were discussing this recently, and even though we've gone through this topic a few times in the past, we thought, it was good to revisit, which was looking at those first 90 days for product operations, right? And this is various phases, and we'll go into this, right? We'll share some of our opinions on that. But it's an interesting topic because all of us, sometimes are thrown into product operations. Sometimes we've convinced someone that product operations needs to be implemented, or sometimes we're just helping the organization in terms of developing their product operations, right? But as one of the ICs or one of the product leaders, either way, the first 90 days is crucial, right? It's about a make or break kind of situation. Um, for me, I'm always reminded, and I've kind of come out with a sort of framework for myself in the first 90 days, right? Which is usually it's around in the first month, it's around creating relationships. And I think this is one of the key factors in product operations. It's always creating those relationships, building up, getting to know the people, getting to know the context, and really being recognized as that partner for the leaders who are going to be working with, right? But during that time, obviously, I start mapping out for myself these kinds of different areas of the organization, these problem areas that I'm seeing, any spotlighting any challenges or any, needs that start popping up. And here what I start doing is I start kind of putting together a backlog for myself or things that I recognize in the background, right? And at the end of that first month, I kind of have some general ideas. The second month for me is about building out what product operations is going to be, or what's the scope, what we're fitting, where we're working. Um, and I start identifying or at least locking down some quick wins, those quick ways we can show some impact, and help the teams already to develop, right, with one little thing. And sometimes it's a simple thing as, oh, I created a new deck, or I created a simple document, or a simple meeting that you threw in it, right? And I also start looking at what is the long-term bigger topics that we want to be looking at, that we're going to be bigger changes that we're going to be implementing. And by the third month, by from 60 to 90 days, there I'm starting to look at, defining that plan. I start creating the baseline of some of these plans and already starting to create, and start working on them and start developing them. And I implement some of those quick wins if I can. And I try and keep it simple. And that's generally my focus, which is, it's building context, already developing something, and hey, just put something out there, but you've got a long-term plan. And you make sure that those quick wins never gonna impact what's your long-term goal with something, right?
Yeah, I think this is the points you've raised are super important. Um, we're in various channels, both of us, Slack channels, different communities, where often the question comes up. In fact, there was one just recently, yesterday, I think, that came up saying, I've just been hired into a product ops position. I wasn't sure if they were the first person or not, but they've just been hired into a product ops position. Is there any advice and guidance on what I should focus on? And I think the key point that you made there is context. Every single organization of course, is different people, structures, different products that they're building, different levels of product maturity, different size of organization. And you may have been hired in to do a different type of product ops to what you think you've been hired to do. You may have been hired in to do the internal data streamlining, gathering the external data, the same classic pillars from the product operations book, looking at tools and services. You may have been hired in to do that. And that's very different to the context of other organizations. When I joined Bumble, we didn't need someone to focus on those things because there was already people there doing that. What we had to focus on is just a high level order understanding of product practice, and having a clearer product rhythm. I think we call it product flow, actually. Or was that far fetched? I forget. I'm mixing them up. I think we call it product rhythm at Bumble. And making that product rhythm really clear, not just to the product development teams, but their key stakeholders and leaders, was one of the most important things. And that was, it's very contextually different to being hired in to focus on data. I think my approach, and this is what I spoke about Product at Heart, which seems like a long time ago now, 2023, when I was still at Bumble, was actually it's more of a what mindset should you go into the organization when you're working in product ops. Not what should you focus on, but what is the mindset. And I think you've explained that really nicely. I call it like going and being the therapist. You have to go in there, and your first, to be honest, like I think 90 days is probably quite a long time to do this. I think the first 30 days you can start to be the therapist, where you're identifying the key people to speak to. You're starting to build those relationships. You're starting to understand some of their challenges and problems, your focus areas. However, your main aim here should be to help them to self-identify and self-solve, like a therapist should do, opening up areas that maybe they weren't even aware of that they're being challenged with, getting down to the real root cause of problems rather than just kind of surface level symptoms that they're seeing. I went to a Women in Tech event a couple of weeks ago now, and Ezra was speaking there, and there was someone else speaking there, and they had a really good kind of like quotable statement, which I thought was really nice, which was start building the relationships before you need them. And I was thinking that's exactly what I expect in those 90 days. Start building all those relationships with people that you may need in the future. I remember again being at Bumble, and in those first 90 days, I was building relationships with people in the legal team, in the safety team, yes, in the data team as well, but some of those broader out stakeholders, finance, the commercial teams and the product marketing teams, etc. Because I knew that in the future I'd need them probably after those 90 days. Once I've started to understand some of the challenges, I'm going to have to pull those people in and start help. They're going to have to help me to solve those problems. And if you can start to build those relationships in those early days, I think you're setting yourself up for more success.
Yeah, actually, there's a point you brought up, right, around the different makeups of product operations. And I think there's an important point here, which is it also depends when we land in how much free space we have. Like, for example, I've had roles where I go in and someone turns around and says, I have no idea what I'm going to do or what this is. You tell me, right? And that basically means I can define what my space is. Whereas other people have, or other teams or other leaders will have a preconceived notion of what they think it should be. And so they almost tell you what it has to be. And you have to kind of figure this out. And I learned this simple trick at the time from, the head of product marketing, which was a simple trick, which was created a simple deck. And I created this little deck And the great thing was I would go into these conversations and I was still in the onboarding, the onboarding phase and everything. And I would put this deck in front of people and say, this is what this is how I'm shaping it. This is what I think it is, putting my idea out in front. And then that way, even with the leaders or my partners who I'd be working with, they would push back and I would say, okay, this is where I have to adjust some things. Or they would say, okay, now I get it. Now I understand how you fit into my world in a nice and simple way. And, not a complex deck. It was like 10 slides, maybe maximum, right? And it was just a simple thing. And they would ask questions, then we could deep dive on it. Because sometimes what happens is there is some unknowns around this, right? And there's a lot of discussion about what it is, what it isn't, and all this kind of stuff. I have had product leaders saying, I see that as my role, so I don't understand why I need you. Right. And so going in there and saying, I totally understand it, I totally get it, but this is where your space goes, this is where my space goes in. Give me one or two projects and I'll even show you how that actually works, right? And we'll work on this together and that kind of stuff. For me, that has created a lot that was super helpful. That simple, just simple deck. It's a marketing ploy, right? But it's a nice, clean way of saying this is what we think, this is what we want to be, this is where we're writing.
Yeah, I mean, getting everyone's thoughts out onto the page and saying, "This is what I think it is. Is this what you think it is? And if not, can we talk about that?" It's also, I think, a bit of starting your negotiation tactics early by and obviously some of the best ways to negotiate is to understand the other person's position, right? You need to be able to understand those different leaders, whether it's a product leader, a tech leader, a design leader, like where they stand on this and what they really care about. Because quite often you find that people are very, very defensive about something. Actually, it's not the thing that they care about, but they're worried that you're going to get to that thing that they care about. So they're becoming defensive very, very quickly.
Okay.
So if you can find out what it is that that matters most to them in the organization and then work towards that with them, they're way more amenable to then you saying, okay, this is product operations, this is how we're going to operate.
And it's actually interesting because I found that, you're mentioning that, and I was thinking about a few conversations that I had early on with, let's say, for example, design leaders or engineering leaders, right, or research leaders. And because of those conversations and because of building up that relationship, they then actually start leaning on me more than I would expect, right? So it's not just the product leaders. They then suddenly come to me and say, "Oh, Hugo, this is a totally your topic," and they throw things at me, and it's like, "Wait, what? That's great. I'm happy about that, right?" But it's because I created that relationship. They saw they could depend on me, that I could be that person that
But
they
you
could.
do have to be careful with that as well, right? Because you don't want to be seen as the dog's body.
Oh, definitely.
Which
Definitely.
obviously ops falls into very, very often, kind of automatically falls into that trap of, I know I can help you. I like to solve problems. You're bringing problems to me. I'll solve those for you. And it's incredibly cathartic in a way. Like you get to do that kind of work and people are always very happy about it. But are you actually solving the deeper problems? So you don't want to become that admin
Of
assistant.
course. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing because I remember I had this one slide around what was our potential scope. And people would look at me and say, "Oh, but that's a huge scope, Hugo. Can you handle all of that?" And I said, "No, no, let's be clear. This is everything that can fit underneath my scope. It doesn't mean I'm going to do all these things, right? Because I
You do
can't."
have to be very clear about it.
Exactly, exactly. So one of the things I would do is I try and prioritize, right? And even when I later had a team, we did this prioritization at a quarter by quarter basis, and I had to have the sign off from the leaders that they were agreeing to the things we're going to be working on, and that wouldn't be changing, right? I mean, we would adapt it, but if they had to adapt it, something would drop, and it was just that simple. We started working on this, structuring it, and everything had to have a sponsorship, right, from a product leader. So we had to do this work. It's something we had to build up. But I started turning around to leaders and I saying, "You're throwing 50 things at me, great." But I need to know the ones that are going to create an impact for you in the next few quarters or the next quarter that is important, right? And that is building towards something in the background, right? Rather than, hey, let's just do everything.
So I've been listening to us both speaking here, and actually, we're coming in from a perspective because this is our background. We're coming in from this perspective of probably joining an organization where product operations is new, either brand new or new-ish, where maybe it's been around for like a year, maybe it's been adding some value but not having a lot of impact, and coming in at a moderately senior level to higher level, like when you joined OLX and I joined Bumble. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on someone joining a already established team, product ops team, that already has a somewhat clear remit and strategy and is doing work and has been for a few years, and you're joining in just as a team member. It might be your first product ops role, or maybe you're coming in as like a senior or a lead product ops person. What differences do you see in those 90 days there?
That's a good question. That's a really good question, right? I think it's always challenging because other people are already doing it, right? They already know what's happening, and especially if you haven't worked in product ops, it can be more challenging. But I look at the folks I had on my team recently, right? And for me, where it created impact was, and I saw this, right? Like, for example, a person would come in and they started showing that they start connecting to the other colleagues in their team, right? And what they do is they just jump on projects. They just, they're totally available to sit and brainstorm through something. They'll help them build something. They'll help create something. What happens there is the rest of the team starts seeing the value in them being there. One of the team members, the new team members, for example, was big into automations, that kind of stuff. And he just started creating these automation type things for everyone. Oh, that little topic you're working on, guess what? I did this quick thing in my free time. What happens is, you start getting brownie points with your team, right? I think another thing is, I think for me, it's important to get with your leader, right? The person who's leading that team. Be clear with them that it's important for you to start creating relationships with your stakeholders, with the people you're going to be working with, right? And if they can put them as soon as possible in front of those people so you can start creating those relationships and start working with them. And sometimes it's hard, right? Because a leader will say, no, no, I'll tell you what you need to work on. It's like, so we have to try and negotiate this, right? We have to create these opportunities because that's where we create the value is when we start connecting to these stakeholders and start supporting them and helping them. And I think that's what we have to try and fight for. At least that's off the top of my head. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're saying there is there's kind of more clearly defined pathways for someone that's joining a team like that to the stakeholders. So it's less on the, again, just touching on some of the words I use, but less on the therapy side because there's already some structure in place and there's already some connection between key stakeholders so you can get access to them very, very quickly. Maybe some of those problems have already been outlined and defined. Maybe they've some experiments being put in place to try and solve some of those challenges as well. So I think about this in terms of Wardley mapping, or at least taking some of the terminology from Simon Wardley and the mapping kind of approach that he has, which is the pioneer, the settler, and the town planner. So I'm going to go even further back because I think when we're identifying new roles that are required and hiring those people, and then they start and have those 90 days, we have to have those kind of concepts in mind. The pioneer is someone that really likes nothing to or less to be in place when they join because they want to be experimental. They probably want to be scrappy, move quickly, put small things in place that are experiments that may work, but hand that over to other people in the teams. And I think when you're hiring for that type of person and you find someone who's done product operations before, but they're more like the settler mode or approach is more, there's things that have been put in place, the experiments have been done, they've solved some of the challenges, and now it's about stabilizing and expanding and amplifying those. I think if you hired those type of people into a more experimental role, what you end up is with a disappointed person in those first 90 days and a team and a leadership that look at them and go, you are not adding any value. And this has definitely happened where with clients of mine in the past where we actually needed someone to come in and be that scrappy experimental person. And we expected things to happen within a 2 week period. Honestly, like we were like, you've got 2 weeks to kind of understand the organization. You've got a further like 2 to 6 weeks max to actually put things in place, but put them in place and move on to the next thing because we are so early on in this journey, we just need things to happen. And honestly, after that first coming up to really probably 60, 70, 90 days eventually, nothing had actually happened. And this person had been working. And I have to say, it wasn't poor work. It was the right thing to do. It was just the wrong time period. That should have been happening 2 years in. And it's because we'd hired someone that wasn't of this more scrappy experimental mindset and more of the mindset of, I want to stabilize things, and I want sort of like broader impact. And really, that person should have been hired 24 months later, not when we hired them. And I've seen it happen exactly the same way, the other way around as well, where we actually need someone to just come in and stabilize what we have because some good work happened already. And they wanted to come in and introduce really, I suppose they were from more of a startup background. So they wanted to introduce new tools and services that were never going to pass through the IT security protocols, right? Some AI, introducing kind of like scrappy AI tools. And I mean, the process of getting something signed off by IT could have taken 90 days, and we needed things to happen, a little bit quicker than, sorry, in this case, we actually wanted things to be stabilized and they wanted to work in like a week by week incremental basis. And I'm like, you can't do that here because actually that's not what we expect of the role. So for in both those examples, someone in the first 90 days is going to be incredibly unsuccessful, and it's not down to them and the type of person they are. It's actually down to like the interview and hiring process and the leadership looking for the right type of person at that time, and it didn't work.
No, that's a super valid point. I didn't think about it that way, right? And it's true, right? When we're hiring, what we have to be sure we're hiring for the right type of person, right? And we have to be clear on the expectations for that person, right? Because, like you said, if you're hiring for a person who's the explorer, the person, the kind of, someone coming in new who hasn't done, you want some. You don't need to define much. You can just basically throw at them, you know what? I don't know what this is going to be. You tell me, right? Whereas with the others, you have to come in and you have to say, look, here are your first 90 days, right? For you to understand, and especially if those are your expectations. And I know I've had a challenge with that in the past, right? Where, like you're saying, I'm hiring people who are strategic, well, systems thinkers, right? And you're hiring systems thinkers, and we've discussed this on a previous episode, right? And you're hiring for that, and then you realize, holy crap, I just need people who are actually good at maintenance, small incremental development, testing out, experimenting on little things and incrementally growing something. And you realize that, you're missing those people on your team and it's going to frustrate the people you do have in your team, putting them on those topics, right? And so you start figuring out, okay, wait, my hiring process has to be different. And then I also think another point bringing up is it also depends, even for example, let's say you've established a product operations team. It also depends on if you're opening up a new pillar, right? Something that hasn't been explored. Like let's say, for example, you've looked at processes and tooling and that kind of stuff, right? Internal operations. And you look and you think, hey, we want to look at the data part. And you might bring in someone with data experience around this and everything. Again, there, what you're doing is to all extents and purposes, it's like you're starting from the scratch again. And so you have to bring in that explorer, but on an established team, right? So there's a mix. That person has to come in with this thinking, but they have to also know how they can integrate with the rest of the team. So all of these things, right? That, again, the relationship for me is always the key. Connecting to the right people, how you collaborate with them, starting to create this habit where people start seeing. And for me, it's always helped in identifying opportunities, challenges, but also seeing where sometimes just connecting to people was the key point, right? And sometimes it's like I say, half of the job I had would be, you should be talking to that person. And it's just that simple. And I identified that because I've had a conversation. That person shared that whole story with me. Another person shared their story. And I was like, oh, wait, these two things are connected, right? And if I didn't have that conversation, I wouldn't get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're taking two perspectives here, aren't we? And we should, because our listeners are a mixture of product ops leaders and a mixture of product ops team members. Excuse me. And I think from a leadership perspective, what we want to be able to do in those 90 days is to empower people in the right ways. And you've heard me say this like 1,000 times, and I say this a lot when I'm speaking as well. But what does empowerment mean? It means alignment to the goals and strategy of the business or the function or the team, and then the autonomy to go and solve those problems. And I think if you take both of these perspectives, the more scrappy, quick, experimental versus the more stable, repeatable practices. As a leader, we should be giving both those groups of people autonomy, right, to solve the problem. So that's a given. Like, what level of autonomy can we give them to solve those problems? It's the alignment is something that's quite different. We have to be very, very clear and communicative. This is what we expect of you when you're joining this business. This particular role we need you to be scrappy, experimental, fast, or we need you to be a little bit slower, more thoughtful because some of these things have happened already. And that for me just should be happening in the interview process. I would also put it onto people who are being interviewed to ask the right type of questions of the people they're interviewing with, which usually like partners or leaders, and to try and unpick some of that to figure out what kind of person is it that you need me to be, because you want to be the most successful person you can in those 90 days, and it's on you to do that as well. um, Something that I also regularly talk about, and I think it applies here to this concept, is the Yapp Triangle. It's actually more of so kind of like I think like a more a social, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, like political and social community practice triangle. That's far too many words, but I'm going to very quickly describe it. And on when we release this episode, I'll link to this as well. But it's basically a triangle where at the top it says now, on the bottom right it says by agreement, on the bottom left it says everywhere. And essentially, you can only choose two of those corners, right? If you want it now and everywhere, it's simply that you have to put rules in place. So if there's like regulation change, if GDPR is always a good example here in Europe. If that change is coming, we're just going to have to put rules in place, right? There is no way around it. That's not a place to experiment. And we do not have to hire pioneering experimental people into that position. Now, if it's something that's now and can be done by agreement, we can actually experiment in that place because we can start to iterate. We don't have to put everything in place straight away in all those places. And I think it's important to think about these things because, again, we need to be hiring the right people into those places. If you need to put rules in place because there's regulatory change or there's a process that's been defined and now it just needs to be like visualized and rolled out and made repeatable and brought into product management onboarding, we just have to get it done. There's no need to kind of experiment in those places. You just have to do it. And there are definitely, and I'm sure there's a lot of people on listening to this podcast as well, that are sat there going, "That's me. I love doing that. I love clearly defining a process and making it repeatable, getting it across all the teams so everyone understands it, and then optimizing it." And that's absolutely fine. Those people we need those people in our team. If we just built our teams full of like experimenters, we would never get anywhere.
No, I completely agree. And it was reminded as you were talking, I was reminded of the situational leadership training I did last year. And I really love that because the idea was where you look at every single situation. And even then, you approach them all differently, right? Because, in any situation, you can go in and you're at level one, another you might be at level two, three, four, etc., right? There's four different levels. And if people can look it up, but basically in the first level, right? And by pinpointing it, each situation, giving it a specific level, even how you talk to your team or how you talk to other people can change the way you talk about a specific topic, right? Because, for example, the first level is something around, and I'm paraphrasing to an extent, but the first level is about how I'm super excited because I have no idea what I don't know, right? So I'm excited. It sounds incredible. Level two is where you know the amount of what you don't know, right? Or it's become really harsh, it's become complex, and you demoralize, right? And you're feeling really down. Level three is where you're kind of proficient, you're really good in everything, but you're not completely autonomous. And whereas level four is, guess what? I'm completely autonomous and you can throw this at people. And people can jump between these levels, even in specific topics, specific things, both upwards and downwards, depending on how they're affected. Because, if certain projects last longer, you can go down the scale, right? Because it gets boring or it gets repetitive or gets tiring. Whereas you can also move up the scale as you learn and as you grow and everything, right? And I love that way of approaching it. And so my team members would come to me and say, Hugo, this topic for me is at a level three, right? And I was like, you sure? And we sit down, we discuss, and they're like, yes. And I say, okay, then let's type it. I'll give you space and everything, but I'm going to give you, but I'm here for you if you need me, and I'll help you, right? That kind of stuff. Or if they told me they're in level two, then I knew I had to sit with them really and work with them through a situation.
So I think thinking about this like 90 days and thinking about what you just said about situational leadership, I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks, I would call it, that I see probably team like product ops team members. To be honest, it's not specific to product ops anyway, is it? But one of the biggest stumbling blocks I see is they think they do know everything in that 90-day period, and they've seen all of it, and they're starting to question almost like even the validity of product operations as a function at this point, because they're starting to question that there's fundamental changes in product thinking that have to happen here for product ops to be successful. Um, and start questioning the levels of leadership 4, 5, 6 levels above them. And I think I see that in people that are relatively new to just the industry, or relatively new specifically to that organization, and maybe don't have the experiences in different sizes of organizations, where they're looking up and going, these people, our leaders, don't know anything. And it's simply that you as a team member, you just haven't seen it yet. You don't know what you don't know. And I think we have to give credit to our leadership. It's kind of why we have levels of hierarchy in an organization, because there's decisions that are being made at the top of the tree that you're just not going to find out about. And I'm thinking, like, kind of thinking back of a few experiences I've had where there would be people joining the team who were like, why are we doing, planning in this way? It's ridiculous. We need to be doing planning on like a monthly basis. Why are we doing it on a yearly basis, or even further in some cases? And it's simply because they just haven't had that level of experience or been exposed to leadership that are having to deal with not only a financial planning cadence that is not monthly, and they're having that conversation to try and change it, but it takes time, or that they're part of a much larger organization where they have their own at leadership level, they have many stakeholders. Some of them might even be big customers that they also have to work with. So we can't just come in and make all these amazing product thinking changes to the organization, because there's things happening elsewhere that you're just not privy to, and that's normal because you've just come in as a product ops manager. You are not the CPO.
I think you make a super valid point, and it's exactly that, right? Sometimes we don't have all the context, or sometimes there's other parts of the organization we can't influence, that kind of stuff. And I'm always reminded,
Nor
and
should we be doing, right? Like
we
in
shouldn't
we
exactly,
should. There's
exactly,
no reason for us to be influencing that part of the organization because it's been
exactly.
handled already.
Exactly. But it reminds me of something where, you know, back in the 90 days and also at our times at Farfetch, one of the things we took on, and I remember Cooldeep, we were working with Cooldeep, and he mentioned the book, which was Switch, right? And what I loved about that book was about finding two things I loved about it. One was that small change that you can make that has a huge impact, right? And sometimes it is that. And we saw that when we we're trying to redefine the process, right? If you just change how discovery is done at the beginning, just a little bit in discovery, it has a ripple effect that changes all the rest of the way that people work, right? Potentially. And another thing I love is the spotlighting the good, right? Where you start spotlighting these little golden moments, or these teams of, incredible things. It actually helps maybe rewire the way we're thinking about it, which is because yes, if you lift up every single, carpet you lift up, you'll find crap underneath it, right? It's just that simple. And it just gets worse and worse and worse the more you dig. But, rather than going down that dark hole, I try and look and say, hold on, but there are moments of incredible things happening here. Let's focus on those, because that's little things, and we can see that those things have worked in this company. Let's actually scale those out, right? And I love that, right? Because it helps us focus on the positives rather than the negatives, because it's like we can sit focusing for 3 hours. And I remember being in one meeting one time about 10 years ago, and the person across from me was reasonably new to the company. And they went through a list of all the reasons why we couldn't do something, right? Because of these, because of blockers, bureaucracy, and everything like that. And halfway through, I was frustrated. And I turned around and said, okay, look, I know you're frustrated with everything we can't do. We know everything we can't do because of the limitations. But now, despite those limitations, let's think about what we can do, right? Let's focus on that, because there's always stuff we can do. And by doing that, you actually find those incredible things that you can do. And sometimes even I have rethought entire processes or frameworks just because of that, because it's like, oh, with the constraints I have, what am I able to do? And something new comes out of that. And you think, oh, I'd never thought of it this way. And it's incredible, right? You reach it in a different direction.
I think to kind of add the cherry on top of that as well. Um, Two very, very actionable frameworks. I wouldn't even call them frameworks, they're just tools, I suppose. So two very actionable tools. One of them actually, again, Kuldeep introduced us to was the what, so what, now what.
Love
I'll
it.
repeat that. What? So what is the challenge or the problem we've identified? So what? Okay, why is it hard for us? Why does it matter? And then now what? The part that maybe is often forgot. Okay, what are we going to do about this? And I think that leans into what you were just mentioning from Switch, right? The small little changes. As long as you can identify what the problem is, why it's such an issue, and what you're going to do next, it's unbelievable how much change can happen based on just those three simple questions. And then just coming to the point you made at the end, there's a little tool called the Johari window, which is something I was introduced to at ThoughtWorks about 8 years ago. And that kind of forces you into a position of identifying your known knowns, your known unknowns, etc., etc. And there's a box on there that's called unknown unknowns. How are you as an individual ever going to figure those out? Well, surprise, surprise, you have to go and speak to all of your partners, all of your stakeholders, all the people that you're working with in and around your team. And I think, again, this is another good 90-day activity that you start to build up that Johari window. It's a simple 4-box matrix. You can kind of imagine what that looks like. Because at the end of it, you get to where you're mentioning here, where it's like, these are things that we can push into, that we know are already challenges, that I can show value and impact very, very quickly because everyone knows it's a challenge, but no one's done anything about it yet. Versus known challenges that no one really knows how to solve might be my next level things. The unknown unknowns are going to have to be tackled later, but they may move around that box because we're starting to understand a little bit more. They're starting to become a little bit more important.
Yeah, and I love it because I remember when we were creating one pages for a lot of the topics we were looking at, and even to this day I still do that. There's always a section for me which was something around assumptions, or what do we think we know, or what, something around what, so that we're clear on the stuff we also don't know, but we think we know. Right. So let's figure this out and verify how wrong we are. But again, this also depends on the complexity of the topic, right? We can't we can't put this amount of effort into every single topic. There are small topics that, and I remember when we were talking about experimentation, right? And I think this is again going to the quick wins and that kind of stuff. There are certain things that it's like, don't waste your time overthinking it, just do it. Right. And sometimes it is that simple. And it's sometimes you get there and people are talking back and forth and you create a simple spreadsheet or you create a simple mapping of what they were talking about or something like that. It changes their way of thinking about it. It didn't cost you absolutely anything, and it's not worth you overthinking. You just want people having something that will solve that at that moment, right? You can think about iterations on that or develop it, evolve it, become a bigger thing later, expand it to other areas of the organization, sure. But for now, it's about, hey, let's just make sure that this is clear, this is quick. We can do them in 5 minutes, right? And it's simple things, and sometimes we can do that.
Yeah, I kind of come back to something that I talk about a lot when we're thinking about how to measure product ops and like what is the impact that it can have. I still stand by the fact that I think many product ops initiatives can be linked to money. Like,
Mhm.
are we going to make more money? Are we
Or
going to
save
be
money.
reducing costs? Yeah, exactly. And again, something I talk about all the time, there's only 5 things that businesses care about, or business stakeholders care about: making money, reducing costs, acquiring new customers, engaging existing customers, or sometimes shareholder investor value. I think prototypes can link to all of those things. Can that be done in 90 days? Now that's a challenge. Can we introduce, change, optimize, remove, improve, spotlight and amplify the good, and link that to some kind of financial measure? That's something that I think if you're joining as a product top leader, you should be trying to force through, because immediately you're not just going to be showing the value of having the function, it's the impact of having the function. It's a much harder, it's a much easier question to have after those 90 days to say, hey, look, we were able to link the work we did directly to revenue generating product initiatives. Um, I think the reason I say that's a challenge is because the current state of both the economy and the hiring market means that people have less than 90 days to show that type of impact. or at least to show the potential for that impact coming in the 90 days. Some cases there's 60 days. Some cases there's 30 days. Like that's a very short amount of time to get in and say my strategic priority is linking product ops initiatives to revenue generating or cost reduction. You can set out a plan in the first 30 days, I think, of how to do that. Achieving it is becoming, it was always hard to do, but it's becoming more and more important to show impact as soon as possible, because honestly, there are questions getting asked after 6 weeks of people being in a company. What is the purpose of this role? Why is it important? And that, that's happened to me in the past for sure. Like, I don't think I was always able to link the work I was doing. I knew it was good and it was valuable. I knew the people I was working with were improving how they did product development. I was supporting people. I was increasing clarity of the work that was happening. I was building relationships and getting more people to talk to each other. Fantastic work. From my perspective as like uh, almost like an in-house consultant product ops person, that was great. But there were still questions asked 3 months in. Why is Chris even here? Like all he does is talk to people, right? There's a lot of value in that, and I can see it happening, and I was in some way able to communicate it. But they were saying there's making no difference to the bottom line here. Now, interestingly, I was not hired to make a difference to the bottom line, but that was their perception. If you're not going to make us more effective and more efficient, what is the point of you existing? And if I was able to go, actually, look, you've done this work, and that was because of me, and you've made money, and that I helped that, it's a much easier story.
Yeah, I think connecting to money saving is always easier than to money generating the product ops work, right? Because it's the type of thing where, for example, you look and you say, okay, I was able to reduce a cost on something in terms of tooling, right? I reduced it by X amount, super easy. People were spending 3 weeks looking at something, looking for something. Now they spend 2 hours, right? You take the amount of time those people were spending on that, and you can see how it reduced the cost you had in terms of operational costs. I think attaching it to money is always harder because it is much more downstream. It's more lagging, right? And it's indirect. We know it has that impact, but we sometimes don't see that. I think there what we need to focus on, and that's why I also when we're trying to measure that impact, it's always focusing on what the direct impact is you can have. And so depending on the specific topic, like for example, we want to build up the capabilities around experimentation, right? Finding a way where you can measure that their experimentation practices have become more efficient and effective, because then you know that the revenue is an impact from there,
It's
right?
like the potential for, right? If I
Exactly.
know if we're increasing our capability in decision making based on data and experiments, we can link that. So it actually, if you look in the next quarter and revenue has increased, you can say I was part of making that difference. Of course, you can't link it. You can never link it that directly.
No, no, no. It's always very hard. It's not impossible, right? Like if you can put together KPI trees and everything, the problem is that those KPI trees never take into consideration operational metrics, right? And so how do you connect those metrics? Because we don't, in fact, most of the companies I've worked in don't really have many operational metrics that you can then connect to something else. And that's one of the big things. I go in and the first thing I say is I find the biggest, the biggest brain around analytics, and I say, hey, can we figure out how to get some operational metrics in, right?
And the
And their first
finance
look is
team,
like,
right? Those
and
two people should be your best friends.
yeah, and they look at you and they're like, I'm not sure where to even start with that because they haven't even been trained to do that, right? So
But at
maybe
least they
there's a
have the
entire niche.
right type of brain and mindset. Honestly, way more than I do to try and tease out some of those things.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Although, being honest, I think, and if we're talking about like you were mentioning those first 30 days, I think the important part is, and it's going back to relationships, it's the main people who decide on whether you stay or go. You have to create that relationship and you have to somehow be able to show them that you will be able to bring that value. And I think if they know it, you almost don't have to have those metrics. You almost don't have to because they can see that impact, right? They can see how you're changing things or that you made them think about something else. Like nothing better than you come to them and you say, look, I was thinking because this showed up, and you present them with something and they're like, I'm liking this, right? They will then invest in you. It's like, okay, I've managed to buy myself a couple of extra days, right? And I think it's trying to find those. I think it's super important getting in front of them.
It's funny that you say that. I can't remember if you were on the same. We had one of the product ops leaders forum calls, It may have been one you were on, but maybe the one before that actually. And one of the who is like a senior director of product operations in the UK for a US company. Um, they said something along those lines, which is because we were talking about how not just to show like your value, your impact, how to measure, but how to keep the function like going in times where support functions are being laid off. And they said something exactly the same, which is all I need to do is find and understand and find out and understand what my manager's goals are and my like 1 to 2 other key stakeholders that are in a really senior leadership level that are probably having conversations about how do we reduce costs, do we have to lay people off. I just need to find out what they want and just do that and just show the value that they're looking for. And even in sometimes where, and this sounds like bad to say, but even sometimes when you're looking at the org and you're identifying some of the problems and the challenges that you want to solve, and you know it's going to have a huge impact, sometimes you have to turn away from those things and just say, well, what does the CPTO want? Why did they hire this team? And honestly, again, in this like 90-day period, just do what they ask. Just do what they ask, get that done. You've stabilized the function, your team, your role, and then you have another 90 days to start having some different type of maybe even broader impact.
No, and you've built that trust with them, right? You've built that thing where they now trust you and they will now trust any advice you give them, maybe moving forward, right? And but actually, Chris, question for you. Does that mean that people who are terrible at building relationships are screwed?
I mean, I think
So,
if
because
anyone,
some people are introverts, right? Some people aren't comfortable building this network even
I
internally.
think introverts can still build relationships. Honestly, if someone's not good at building relationships, I don't think they're going to be successful in the product operations role. I really don't think they're going to be hugely successful in product development as an industry either. There's only very rare times where I've seen people that really actively turn away from relationship building and collaboration be successful. Um, usually like mostly in the IC space, the builders, the doers, the people that are building the products that we're trying to drive business impact with. And if they're not collaborative, they can be somewhat successful, but it's very, very rare. This industry requires you to be collaborative. And I honestly hope that continues to be the case. It's a little scary seeing the introduction of AI taking away some of that human to human collaboration and relationship building. But you're certainly not going to be good in product operations because if you want change to happen, you have to lead by example. You have to get people on board. They have to trust you to do that. And equally, if there's anyone listening that thinks, okay, I'm struggling with relationship building, you're never going to be the best leader in the room. You can still become a leader. There's many organizations that are usually the larger ones that will promote people that are maybe not the best relationship builders. And in some cases, generally toxic people. Honestly, there's a tactic, and I don't agree with it, but there is a tactic in some organizations to get toxic people away from the teams is to just keep promoting them. So they end up in a position where they're making such high level decisions that their toxicity isn't impacting anyone. And that's a sad place to be. But I really believe you need to be great at building those relationships. Everything we do is based on trust.
No, and look, maybe I can add to this, right? I was used to be an introvert, very much so in terms of, and nowadays I can talk, with people and build relationships, but it's something I had to work on over the years. I think for me, and just advice for anybody out there, it's like a good way of doing it is teaching other people, mentoring people, putting yourself out there occasionally. You don't have to be big groups, so you don't have to go to an international conference, but there's little meetups and things like that. Just putting yourself out there, testing it out, and don't be so harsh on yourself, but try it out. Just start building out. It doesn't have to be superficial. You don't have to build something if you don't feel comfortable with it. But I think there's always a way of doing it. There's small little ways of just building it up. Find the people you want to connect with, the people you want to talk to, start training on them.
Yeah, I mean, look, extroverts also a challenge with building relationships because they may go overboard in trying to build maybe as many relationships as they can, or they do it in a very proactive way that can actually be quite damaging to that relationship, and um, I don't think it's an introvert versus extrovert thing. I think different people approach relationship building in different ways. The way
Yeah.
that I've always done it, and actually, this is why I really enjoyed that quote, because when I look back over my time, I'm like, oh, I did that automatically. Again, that quote being, build the relationships before you need them. The way that I've always done it, and this is what I help with my when I do my like leadership coaching, is building relationships is simply about understanding other people. What are their what do they care about? What are their values? I pride myself on a superficial enough level of understanding of most things. I mean, that sounds very egotistical. It does not mean to come across that way. But if someone started talking to me about martial arts, I can talk to them about Muay Thai. If someone came to me and started talking to me about I don't know, like the Victorian period in London, I can probably talk to them a little bit about that. And I think if you're of a growth mindset where actually learning is enjoyable for you, I never know anything to a really super deep level, right? I'm not a specialist in anything. I just know a lot about lots of random things. But that's what I enjoy doing. Because of that growth mindset and having those things in my back pocket, it's a lot easier for me to build relationships with people because whatever they start talking about, even if they start talking about, their children or that they have a dog at home, I can talk about that. If that's what they want to talk about, I will talk about it. And that's a great way to build relationships. And just like tying that back to the topic that we have here, those first 90 days is about building the relationships and quickly leaning on the ones that you need to so that you can have the impact that you're expected to have.
Yeah, yeah. And Chris, now we're on time and closing off. Maybe we've talked about so many things. Is there any final message you want to leave the folks with, the listeners with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first 90 days can be a real mixture of like excitement and pressure. I think you really have to like balance those things out, particularly again in this economic climate, in this hiring climate. Interviewing is incredibly tough. Finding roles is incredibly tough. I know people are really struggling with their interview processes. They're getting right to the end and they're still not being successful. Don't and remember, don't turn those red flags into amber flags. If something isn't feeling right, when you ask the question of your manager, how do we expect to work together? And the answer isn't clear, or the answer is something that doesn't quite work for you, don't go, well, I'm really needing a job right now. I just have to do it. I know everyone's financial situation is different and people do have to jump for those types of jobs. But if you can, don't turn the red ones into amber ones so that when you join, you actually do have a real clear view of what your manager, your team, your organization expect of you in that 90 days and that you are actually able to achieve it. And again, just going back to what we just said, spend your time working on those relationships, but do something small that has bigger impact in those first 90 days.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think you touched on all the key points, and I'll just put my
I, li-
check
I
mark
like I
next to
like
it.
I like how you threw the hot potato to me at the end. That was not planned. Thoughts Unraveled is never planned, so it
Never,
happened on our
never.
feet.
I don't know
Um,
if you can tell because it's so fluid. Thanks, folks. Speak to you next time, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.